Welcome to episode 4 of how to build an RTS in Unity. In this episode, we're going to be covering control groups. A control group is used to assign sets of units to specific shortcut keys, so it's easy to select them quickly when needed. Here's an example of how it should look when we're done. We select some units, hold Control, and press any one of the top row numbers on our keyboard, and it'll store the group. Then, when we want to select them again in future, we simply press that number and they're selected. Before we get started, it would be great if you could take a look at the Steam page for Fungal Front listed in the comments. If you're interested, add a wishlist and you'll get notified when it gets released. Let's begin by opening our IDE and right-clicking on the scripts folder. Let's click on Add, New Folder, and let's call this Structures. We can right-click, Add, New Item, and let's call this Control Group Item. We can make it public, and we can remove the namespace. Now let's define a public int called key number and a public selectable object called selectable. Let's also create a constructor by typing CTOR and hitting tab twice, and we'll take in both parameters, so int key number and selectable object selectable. Then we'll assign key number with a capital K to key number, and if it autocorrects, just fix it like that, and do the same for selectable. Now we can head back to our game manager script, and let's define a private list of control group item and call this control groups. And let's create another script by right-clicking on scripts, add new item, and let's call this one control group indicator. We can also make this public and remove the namespace. Now let's head back to our game manager script and let's create 3 methods. First, we'll create a private method called show control group indicators. And one called hide control group indicators. And let's have one more called private void deselect control group indicators. We'll come back to these at a later point. Now let's go back up to our update method, and over here we're going to be calling a method which will handle our control group interactions. So let's create another method and call it exactly that. Handle control group interactions. Then over here we can type handle control group interactions and go back to our method. In this method, we're going to loop through all numbers to check whether any of them have been pressed. And if they have, we'll assign the selected units to the control group of the number pressed, or we'll select the units for the relative group. So let's do a for loop, and we'll make it go from 0 to lower than or equal to 9. And we'll say I++. And we'll type if input.getKeyUp i.toString. This will run through each of the numbers to see whether any of those keys were pressed in the current frame. Now we'll want to check whether the control key is down as well. That can be done by saying if input.getKey, and we'll say left control. At this point, we'll want to add the selection to the control group. Otherwise, we'll want to select the units for that control group. So let's create these two methods. First, private void select units for control group. And we'll take in an int of key number, and the other will be private void add selection to control group. And we'll also take in key number. So if left control is pressed, then we're going to say add selection to control group, and we'll simply pass in the index of the for loop. And if not, we'll say select units for control group and pass in the index. Now we'll need one more method, and that will be called clear control group items. And for this method, we'll also want to take in the key number. We can now go to add selection to control group and say clear control group items for this key number, and show control group indicators also for this key number. We'll also need to take this in as a parameter. And let's run a quick for loop through all selected units. And we can go control groups dot add new control group item. And because we set the constructor, it will take in these two parameters. Firstly, key number, and the second will be selected unit dot selectable object. Now we can go to the clear control group items method, and let's run another for loop, except we'll run this one in reverse. So we'll say I equals control groups dot count -1, I is bigger than or equal to 0, and I minus minus. Now, because we're running in reverse, we can remove the items one by one. So we'll say if control groups I dot key number is the same as the incoming parameter key number, then control groups dot remove at I. Now let's go up to our select units for control group method, and the first thing we'll do is to clear the unit selection. Then we'll deselect all control group indicators. And before we move on, let's go and define our control group indicators array. So we'll go to the top and say serialize field private control group indicator, and we'll make this an array because we won't be changing these. And we can go back down. Let's figure out what's wrong here. That's just the lowercase t. Okay. Right, now that we've defined these, let's go back into Unity and set up our UI. And let's right click and say create empty, and let's call this one HUD. Drag it up here. Then select HUD, right click and create empty, and let's call this control groups. From here we'll right click, click on UI and click on canvas. And now we can begin creating our control group indicators. So let's move to the 2D view. Let's right click, click on UI, and let's start with the text. Click on import TMP essentials. We can close this and press F to frame the text. Right, we can see that's in the center of the screen. Let's click on the inspector, change it to number 1, and press W to position it. Let's start by positioning this one up top, and we can probably bring the size down to something like 26, let's say. With this done, let's select the canvas, right-click, and click on UI and go Panel. In the inspector, let's click over here, and let's make this anchor to the left. We can now set the height, so let's set the height to 100 and the width to 100. And we can pull that left and bring it up here. You can press F to go closer, and let's see how that looks in game. Great. Okay, from here, we'll want to show a sprite for the selected unit. So let's click on our SWAT guy, right click, click on prefab, and open in isolation. Let's get a front view and turn off all gizmos. We can also deselect the unit and turn off the grid. Now let's take a screenshot by pressing on print screen and select the unit. Then we can head to our browser and type image background remove. Then let's head to the Adobe image background remover and upload our screenshot. That looks good, and then we can hit download. Let's go back to Unity, back into our project view, and let's go to our sprites folder. We can create a new folder and call this thumbnails, and right click, import new asset, downloads, and let's take our downloaded sprite, select it, open the inspector, set it to sprite, and apply. Now let's head back to our scene view. Then from the project folder, let's rename this to SWAT guy. Now let's right click on our canvas, click on UI, and click on image. Then open the inspector and drag the SWAT guy into the source image slot. Let's click on set native size, go to our scene view and press F. Then we can press W to move him up here, press R to scale, and let's make him a bit smaller, press F again, R, and that looks okay. Now let's drag the text element to be a child of panel and do the same for image. Then we can rename panel to 1. Now let's go to the project tab, click on scripts, and double click on control group indicator. Let's type using Unity engine and make sure that we inherit no behavior. Then let's type using TM Pro for the text, and we'll also import Unity engine.ui. Then type serialize field, private game object, and let's type panel object. Hit enter, type serialize field again, private, and this one will be a TMP text, and this will be indicator text. Alright, then we'll want to declare 4 public methods. So the first will be show indicator. We'll do another for hide indicator. And a third one for was selected. And the last one will be was deselected. Then all we're going to do when it was selected is to say indicator text dot color equals cyan. And when it's deselected, we'll do color equals white. On show selected, we'll take the panel object and set active true. And when it's hidden, we'll take panel object.set active false. Then let's head back to Unity and open up the inspector. Right click on this one, click on create empty parent, and this one can also be called 1. And let's actually name this panel. We can click on 1, add component, and look for control group indicator. Then we can take the panel object and drop it there, and the text and drop it there. Let's also set the anchor to top left. Then let's open the game tab, click on inspector, and let's adjust the background color. Let's go with black and make it a little darker. Something like that. Okay, before we move on, let's make a prefab of this so we can easily change it when we need to. So open the project folder. In the prefabs folder, we'll right click, create folder, and let's call this indicators. Then we'll drag number 1 and drop it over there and call it SWAT guy. Right, now we'll select the prefab and press Ctrl D. Then we'll move this down and Ctrl D again. We'll just keep doing that. Now we can click on the second element, press F2, type 2, and give each of these the appropriate name. And we can also adjust the text. Now that we have all of these created, let's select this bottom object, hold Shift and select this. Then we can hold down Control and press left to collapse all of them. And let's open up Game Manager, and we can press the lock button so that we can select multiple objects while keeping this inspector open. And let's drag these onto control group indicators. You'll notice that the first element is currently number 1. So let's drag element 9 to the top so that 0 is the first element in the array. Then we can head back into our script and let's scroll down to show control group indicators. Now let's type control group indicators, open square bracket, type key number, and dot show indicator. Then for hide control group indicators, we'll run a for loop through all of them. So I equals 0, I is lower than control group indicators dot length, and I plus plus. Then we'll set control group indicators I dot hide indicator. Lastly, we'll go to deselect control group indicators, and we'll run another for loop for I equals 0. I is lower than control group indicators dot length, I plus plus, and control group indicators I dot was deselected. Then on start, we'll want to hide all of our control group indicators. So type hide control group indicators and hit save. Now let's go back to our select units for control group method. Then type control group indicators, open square brackets, type key number, dot was selected. Now we're going to run a for loop through all of our control groups to check whether the key number matches the key number stored. So we'll type for int I equals 0, I is lower than control groups dot count, and I plus plus. Note that we use count for a list and length for an array. Now we'll check whether the key number matches. So we'll say if control groups I.key number is equal to the key number. And if it is, we'll want to be able to select that unit. Let's head over to our selectable object script, and we're going to want to return this unit. Because it's private, we'll want to have a public method that exposes it. So we can click over here, hit enter, type public unit, get this unit, and type return this unit. Let's go back to our game manager script, and now we can select the unit. Type select unit, control groups I.selectable.get this unit. And we'll add it to the selection with add true. Let's hit save. Then, as a last step, let's go to the start method and let's hit enter and type control groups equals new list of control group item. Let's hit save and let's go back into Unity. Now let's hit start. Let's select some units, press Ctrl 1, right click, select these units and press 1, and you'll see they're selected and the text has changed. Let's put this unit in control group 2, and now these three in 3. So we can go 1, 2, 3. Great. Let's put them all in 4. And we can of course do this for all of the numbers. If you're having any trouble, I'd suggest taking a look at the game manager, going to the inspector, and ensuring that each of these elements are in the correct order. We've now successfully implemented control groups, box selection, unit selection, and unit movement. On the next episode, we'll be focusing on camera control. This means that we'll be able to move across the map by moving our mouse to the edges of the screen. Thanks for watching, and see you next time.